The picture that we're now seeing on the screen appears to be a pretty old picture of Mount Carmel. Can you give us some of the history about the founding of Mount Carmel and something about this particular photograph that we're looking at?
What we have right here, Phil, is a panoramic view of Mount Carmel in about 1910. We're looking from this angle from the southwest to the southeast. We're basically in the vicinity of the Holy Cross Church. To give you some idea about the history of Mount Carmel, ironically, we're looking at one of the earliest settled areas of Mount Carmel. The first settler in Mount Carmel was Lawrence Lamberson, who actually owned the whole tract of land that Mount Carmel was built on. He had a farm in the area just about where that prominent building is that you can see in the center there. You can notice Holy Cross Church kind of to the right of the photograph. That area was the area where Lawrence Lamberson had his farm. And the area around the Holy Cross Church was at one time his orchard and part of the field of his farm. The Holy Cross Church area was really one of the last parts of the town to be settled, even though there was an early settler on that plot of land. That was known as the G.A.R. Park. The G.A.R. was the organization of Union Civil War veterans that were very prominent in Mount Carmel, and they owned that area that was once Lamberson's field, and they used it as a park. In 1892, the G.A.R. sold that park that they had in order to finance the refurbishing of the Opera House, which was located on Hickory Street, where the post office now stands. So simultaneously, we were looking at one of the earliest settled areas of the town, yet one of the last parts of the town to be developed.
And G.A.R. Stands for Grand Army of the Republic, is it?
The Grand Army of the Republic. They were a very prominent organization in Mount Carmel. They were composed, as I mentioned, of the veterans, the Union veterans of the Civil War. They built an opera house on Hickory Street, where the post office is, as I said. And that building provided most of the major entertainment in Mount Carmel over a period of years. And a little bit later we'll see some photographs of some of the things that they had at the G.A.R. Opera House.
Now, as you said, this picture is about circa 1910, and I understand the population of Mount Carmel Borough at that time was about similar to what it is currently. Is that correct?
Well, in 1910, Phil, it was a little bit more than it is now. I would say in 1910 the population was around 12,000. It was approaching the all-time high, which was in 1930, of about 17,700. So I think at the all-time high, the population of Mount Carmel was almost about 18,000. If you included the township and some of the outlying areas, we really had a population in the immediate vicinity of the town of almost 20,000 people. In this view, on the far side of the panorama, we can see the old road that went up to Reliance.
The picture we're now seeing and the viewers are seeing at home is purported to be the oldest building in Mount Carmel. Can you tell us something about this?
Well, it was the oldest building in Mount Carmel at the time this photograph was taken, Phil. This photograph was taken in about 1894. That building, of course, is no longer with us. What it is part of the Mount Carmel Inn, which was one of the earliest buildings in Mount Carmel, actually one of the first. This building was an annex to the Mount Carmel Inn, and it was located where the Belfonte and Cohen building is at the corner of Apple and 3rd Streets. This building was torn down in about 1900, 1901, so it's no longer with us. But just to give you an idea of the age of this building and a little bit more on what I was talking about in the last photo, Lamberson, who I mentioned was the first settler in Mount Carmel, came to the area in about 1792. At that time he received a warrant, which was basically permission from the state government to have a tract of land surveyed. He had the tract of land, which now includes Mount Carmel Borough, approved and surveyed in 1792. In 1811, he received a patent for that tract of land. The patent means that he eventually received the title to the property and became the owner of it. At about this time, around 1811, the center turnpike, which was the main highway connecting Reading with Sunbury, passed right through Mount Carmel. And it became a very important stopping point on the center turnpike because it was located basically where the turnpike traversed the Shamokin Creek, which at that time was not polluted as it is now and actually abounded with fish. There were 3 inns located at this juncture of the center turnpike. One of them was the building that we mentioned that was erected by Lawrence Lamerson, his home. At that time, people's homes also doubled as inns or taverns. So Lamerson had one at that time, and that was known as the Orchard House. The second one to be built was known as the Riffert Tavern, which was located right now where the office building of Karras and Helfrich is located on the road up toward Wilburton. That was the second inn in the area, and as I said, that was erected in around 1812, 1813. And the Mount Carmel Inn was erected around 1814. So at one time, about that time, there were 3 inns basically operating in that area. By 1820, the Orchard House, which had been Lamerson's house, was no longer in use, and the Mount Carmel Inn and the Riffert Tavern were 2 very important inns for, I would say, the next 30 years. As we know today, the Marble Hall was located on the very same site as where the Mount Carmel Inn was. Actually, it was the Mount Carmel Inn, then there was another hotel known as the Deppen House, which became the Commercial Hotel, which became the Marble Hall.
And we'll see some pictures of these a little bit later.
That's correct.
The picture that has just come into view now appears to be that of our main street, the main business district, and evidently this picture was taken before Oak Street was paved. Can you tell us a little bit about the picture, when it might have been taken, and when Oak Street was paved?
Yes, Phil, this picture was taken in about 1897, 1898. You asked the question about when the streets were paved. They were first paved with brick in 1909, and there are certain sections in town where we can see evidence of the brick streets. We all, well, those of us that are my age or older remember when Maple Street was all brick, and you could hear the wheels of your car sing as they drove over the hill from 3rd Street down to 4th Street. But at any rate, back to the picture. As I said, this picture was taken about 1897. Mount Carmel had really begun to develop as a community, of course, with the beginning of the coal trade, which started in the 1840s and really began to make an effect in the Mount Carmel area around the 1860s. And by the 1870s, 1880s, the industry had really gotten itself established in Mount Carmel. And by the turn of the century, Mount Carmel was the 2nd largest city or town in Northumberland County. As we all know, it was created as a borough in 1862. So this photograph represents Mount Carmel at the time when it was really beginning to thrive as a coal-producing community.
And I understand you from the old newspapers that when they did brick Oak Street in 1909, it was one of the first communities outside of the major metropolitan areas that had their streets paved in this fashion.
That's true, Phil. Mount Carmel was a very progressive community, as we know from the fact that it had one of the first electric illuminating companies in the world in Mount Carmel, and Mount Carmel was not only progressive on as far as electricity was concerned, but it also had one of the first water companies, and as I said, the town was really composed of men that were very, very progressive in thinking.
And for our viewers, I don't think they would probably recognize what side street that was taken on. It's Oak Street and what, looking which way?
This is Oak Street and 2nd Street, and we're looking basically south on Oak Street. On the right-hand side, we can see what is now Kirby's Restaurant, was at that time the First National Bank building. Also to the right of that was Henry T. John's store, which is now the law office of Bob Sakavage. Also on the left, Steve's clothing shop was in existence then as it is now, and that was also there at that point. Also, where Stecker's is now located was the main office of the Mount Carmel News, which was at that time the most important newspaper in Mount Carmel. You may recall that we recently, when I say we, I mean the Mount Carmel Public Library, recently finished a microfilm project. We found the old files of the Mount Carmel News and had them redone, had them photographed, and they're now part of the files of the Mount Carmel Public Library. But that was a very important newspaper at that time. It was founded in 1879 and went out of existence in 1930.
This picture appears to be out of the gay 90s or somewhere around there. Can you tell us who these gentlemen are and where this was taken?
Yes, continuing, Phil, with the Mount Carmel Daily News, as I was mentioning in the last photo. This is the staff of the Mount Carmel Daily News. This was around 1899. We can see some of the people who worked on the paper in the photograph, the men on the left, some of the printers and copy readers, and the boys on the right-hand side are the actual newspaper carriers, the delivery boys. The man in the center of the photograph is Robert J. Wilson, who was the editor of the Mount Carmel Daily News for at least 10 to 12 years of its existence. Mr. Wilson was the nephew of M.K. Watkins, who was the founder of the First National Bank and the Edison Electric Company and the Water Company, and was the father of Mrs. Marshall Stecker, who is now deceased.
And you, for our viewers, can you identify what is there today?
Yes, this is on the site of now Stecker's stationery shop. Half of the building was a stationery store, as we see there, and the other half, of course, was the newspaper. On the second floor of the building was located the telegraph station in Mount Carmel, and I guess it was logical that the newspaper be located in the same building as the telegraph station.
This appears to be another picture of Oak Street looking south, I would imagine. And can you tell us something about this picture, when it might have been taken, some of the buildings there?
This picture was taken, Phil, in 1908, 1909. You can notice in the background that the Edison Electric Company is in operation there. You can see the 4 smokestacks in the background. Also, you'll notice the Penny Building, which had a large tower on top of it. There was a great fire in that building in the 20s, and that tower fell off and actually toppled into the street. But of course, the building is much the same today, of course, without the tower. As we move toward the left-hand side of the picture, or the eastern side of Oak Street, we can notice in this photograph that it was taken before the Guarantee Trust building was built. We'll notice that the Majestic Theater, which was an early movie theater, is located on the corner of 3rd and Oak Street. And of course, the Guarantee Trust building came along a few years later in about 1911, and which replaced the theater building.
How many theaters were there about in Mount Carmel back in 1911?
Well, around 1911, I would say that there were probably about 5 movie theaters in Mount Carmel at that time. There were quite a few of them, and they were very, very popular.
This picture appears to be a type of picture you don't see on a postcard. A section of town, maybe you could explain where it was taken.
Yes, that's true, Phil. For some reason, you don't often see a photograph on a postcard of this section of town. This is in, of course, the eastern section of town. It was taken on approximately, I think it's around 2nd and Locust Streets. It appears to be a very early morning shot. You can see the reflection of the sun coming up on the faces of the building. This photograph, by the way, was taken from an old glass negative that was given to me by some people that I know in Shamokin. And I thought it was amazing because it also shows the Shamokin Creek coming through Mount Carmel, of course, before the creek wall was constructed. I think that footbridge was still with us until only a few years ago, or at least there was some type of bridge in that area at that point. You can see what a real health hazard at the same time the creek was at that time, because you may not be able to see it on the television screen, but you can notice a barrel kind of floating in the center of it, and you can tell that it was really kind of dirty at that time. The Mount Carmel Colliery was located in the eastern section of town at that point, and I imagine a lot of their refuse came down that thing in addition to actual raw sewage. Very kind of smelly time at that point until Mount Carmel got a little bit more progressive and started cleaning that up a little bit.
Another thing you wouldn't see today, looking just over the bridge, going up the street, I guess that is Locust Street, you can see a bunch of chickens in the middle of the street. You wouldn't find that in modern downtown or any part of Mount Carmel today.
This picture also appears to have been taken in the winter time, because a very, very light snow appears to be down on the street. But I think it's a good photograph, because you don't often get to see photographs of the creek before the creek walls were erected.
This photograph appears to be a winter scene of maybe a highway or a roadway. It certainly isn't an interstate. Can you tell us something about it?
Well, it certainly is a highway, Phil, but it's not the kind of highway that we imagine today. This, believe it or not, is a winter photograph of the Centralia Highway, which up until well into the 20th century, I should say, was basically just kind of a two-rutted wagon trail. I thought, since we were in the eastern end of town, that we'd go a little bit farther out, and I think this is a very attractive scene, winter scene. But it also shows you how primitive the actual highway system was, even up until the time of the 20th century. This is significant in a sense, because a very famous event happened in that area that has kind of been made our area famous, at least by some people who are students of labor history. But the murder of a mine boss, Alexander W. Ray, occurred on this highway in 1867. And those of us who know our Molly Maguire history know that Pat Hester and two other of his accomplices were hanged in Bloomsburg in 1878 for the murder of Alexander Ray. And this is where it occurred, right on the Centralia Highway.
The picture that's now on the screen appears to be some type of groundbreaking ceremony, something like that. Can you describe this picture?
This picture was taken in 1889, and it shows the kind of the groundbreaking or laying of the cornerstone of the Vine Street School building, which was commonly known as the Lincoln Building. The Lincoln Building was located on 4th and Vine Streets, now the site of the Mount Carmel Elementary Building, which of course was erected in 1936. This is an interesting photograph because of its early time. It's 1889, and there's a lot of activity in the picture, and that's what makes it so interesting. In the foreground, we have children playing and workmen kind of milling around. They don't appear to be too interested in what's going on. In the center of the photograph, we have a minister who has his hands up either in a benediction or an opening prayer. I don't know whether it was actually the beginning of the ceremony or the end. You can see men who are close to the center of the photograph taking their hats off. So that's how we know that it's a prayer of some type. And we have all the dignitaries, of course, standing around in the middle. The main speaker for this event, by the way, was the congressman at that time, who was from Pottsville. His name escapes me right at this moment, but history records through the newspapers that it was their congressman. In the background, you can notice the stables for the houses that front on Maple Street. Every house at that time had a stable. I was about to say every horse had a house, but this is what we see in the background. And also, it's notable the kind of the skyline of the city in the back, just barely visible, are noticeable the two spires of the two Our Lady's churches. they existed simultaneously for a while until the older one, which was on the corner of Market and 4th Street, was torn down. But this is a rare picture when you can see actually the two spires from both of them. Also visible to the left in the photograph is the Hickory Street School building, which was located on the corner of Hickory and 3rd Streets, now where the courtyard for the now vacant high school building is located.
This picture appears to be in my end of town. Can you tell us something about when it might have been taken and whose houses are shown there at that time?
I can tell you exactly when it was taken, Phil, because the photograph was very kindly given to me by Mr. George Scott, whose family built the home that we're looking at right there on the corner of Beach and West Avenue. This area of town also was developed rather late. It was known as Huff's addition to Mount Carmel Borough and did not actually become part of the borough of Mount Carmel until the late 1880s. However, it was a very fashionable area to build homes, and some of the more important people of the town at that time built their house out on the avenue at that point. Some of the more famous people that figure in the history of Mount Carmel owned the houses that are in that line that we see in this photograph. You can't notice it, but on the other side of the street there were no houses even built at that time, and of course none of the beautiful churches that now are in that area were not there at that time either.
This picture that we're looking at now appears to be one of the oldest streets in Mount Carmel. Is that the turnpike we're looking at?
Yes, it is, Phil. As we mentioned before, the turnpike was really the main thoroughfare through Mount Carmel, and as I said before, actually predates the town. This was the only exit and entrance to Mount Carmel until 1929, when the viaduct was built. But in this photograph, which is a fairly interesting one, we're looking toward North Turnpike Street, or in a southerly direction. On the right-hand side, we see the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania depot. That train station, by the way, was built in 1906. They started building it in 1906 after the first one burned down, and it was completed in about April of 1907. We can see a truck emerging on the left-hand side. Oh, by the way, this picture was taken about 1918, just after World War I. The truck on the left-hand side is coming out of the Anthracite Brewing Company, which was founded in about 1895.
This picture appears to be in the same vicinity.
It's exactly the same vicinity, Phil. We're just looking in the opposite direction than we were in the other photograph, although this picture was taken about 8 years earlier. This picture was taken in 1910, and we're looking in a northerly direction on the turnpike on the way out of town. In the very distant background, you can see a horse and buggy coming into the town. On the right-hand side is, of course, the Anthracite Brewery that I mentioned about before. In the very, very distant part of the picture, you can just see the Mount Carmel Township School building, and beyond that, if it's possible, is the Sioux Colliery. The Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania depot is again visible on the left. When I say Lehigh Valley / Pennsylvania depot, I mean the fact that this railroad station was shared by the Lehigh Valley and the Pennsylvania Railroad. Actually, the Lehigh Valley owned the station, and the Pennsylvania Railroad leased part of it for them. This was a very important junction of these two railroads. The Pennsylvania Railroad was responsible for hauling iron ore from the Great Lakes region of Erie down to Northumberland, and from Northumberland the trains went through Shamokin, Excelsior, and then up into Mount Carmel. When they got to Mount Carmel, the cars were then taken off, and the Lehigh Valley picked up the ore at the point in Mount Carmel, and then took them on into Bethlehem, where the steel mills were. So this was a kind of an area where the trains kind of exchanged. There were as many as 22 iron ore trains went through Mount Carmel at its high point. In addition to the iron ore trains, there were also coal trains and passenger trains from this point. So you can imagine what kind of busy railroad traffic we had in this area of town. It's no wonder that the street down in that area was named Railroad Street.
And I understand you that at one time in the 20s, as many as 27 passenger trains stopped in Mount Carmel, and that the ore trains kept coming through here until the mid-1950s.
That's correct.
Again, I guess we're down around the Lehigh Valley Station here.
Yeah, again, Phil, this shows you the kind of activity that I was talking about in the last photograph. In this photograph, we see a locomotive train. It appears to be a coal train heading up the Lehigh Valley tracks in a kind of in an easterly direction. We can notice the office there for the Mount Carmel Lumber Company, which was there then, and we can see how many tracks there were in that vicinity. I think when the tracks were taken out a number of years ago, about 4 or maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, whenever it was, there were only maybe a double track there, even if that. And you can see at the height of the rail activity in Mount Carmel, this was 1910, by the way, we can see here in the foreground at least at least 3 tracks right there. And I believe there were more on the northern side of where the lumber company is. You'll also notice that there's a water tower in the front of the lumber company, which would be basically facing North Vine Street. So again, this just gives us another idea about all of that rail activity that was down in the railroad street section of town.
This appears to be a very familiar sight to some of us more senior citizens. I believe it's the 5th and Market Street side of the old Reading Railroad Station. Is that correct?
Well, we're not all that senior, Phil, and I remember this station myself. I think it was torn down in about 1961 or 1960 to make way, of course, for the A&P. The Reading station was also very important in Mount Carmel, although I might add that the Reading Railroad did not traverse Mount Carmel, did not go right through the town. The main line of the Reading Railroad, of course, went from Ashland to Mount Carmel Junction and then into Shamokin. And the station at Mount Carmel Junction, which many of us still remember also, which was there basically until I guess around the beginning of the 60s. There used to be a train called the Pee-wee that ran passengers into Mount Carmel from Mount Carmel Junction into the station here located at 5th and Market Streets. Again, the Reading Station, many people, I talked to someone last summer whose first recollection of Mount Carmel was pulling in on a train and getting off at the platform of the Reading Station. I think it seems a shame, really, that the building that was built and this torn down for is now also abandoned. It's a shame that we really couldn't have done something to preserve some of the railroad stations we have here in Mount Carmel.
As I recollect, you naming a few names, I believe Henry Brecker was one of the last station agents up at the Reading Station. And when the Pee-wees discontinued, they ran bus service from the Mount Carmel Junction in, and Jack Bierschmidt was one of the first drivers to drive that route.
I believe some of those people were relatives of yours, Phil, weren't they?
Could be. Oh, this looks like a very interesting group, and I understand that there's a real dignitary among that group.
Yes, there is, and before I identify who that dignitary is, Phil, I'd like to talk again a little bit about the G.A.R. Opera House. You recall when I mentioned it earlier in this presentation that the G.A.R. Opera House was the real center of entertainment in Mount Carmel for many, many years. And it really, really was. It was built basically in the early 1870s and was managed by a man by the name of Mr. Joe Gould, who was a very prominent war veteran, Civil War veteran in Mount Carmel, and lived out on West Avenue where Zari Jebko lives right now. Joe Gould, as I said, was the manager of the G.A.R. Opera House and was really responsible for bringing first-class entertainment into Mount Carmel. You have to remember that in the early days of the town, there were no radios or televisions, and people really had to rely upon entertainment of their own making if they really wanted to get out and enjoy themselves. And Joe Gould was quite an exceptional fellow. He was an author, and as I said, he was a war veteran, very successful businessman. Yet at the same time, he lent a lot of his energy into getting the first-class entertainment for the G.A.R. Opera House. Among some of the notables at the G.A.R. Opera House were Annie Oakley and her show, and many of the early vaudeville actors were there. Eddie Cantor, and I can't really remember.
George Burns?
Well, no, I'm not certain whether George Burns was there, but I might also mention that William Jennings Bryan also spoke there, who was a candidate unsuccessfully for the presidency twice, and who we remember was in the famous Scopes monkey trial with Clarence Darrow. In any case, in this photograph, this is a banquet which was given in honor of Wild Bill Cody, who is seated kind of right there where the arrow is on the right-hand side of the picture. You can see his curly silver locks in the picture, and he put on his famous Wild West show. This was around 1912, and Joe Gould was very fond of giving parties in his backyard. And this is one such gathering he had in honor of Buffalo Bill. I haven't really been able to identify all of the people in the photograph. Mr. Gould himself is on the picture right next to Buffalo Bill. But also, the only other two people that I do know are attorney H.O. Moser and his wife Jenny, which are on the far side of the table on kind of in the back right there. Yes, that's correct.
Well, it looks like we're in football season here now. How about telling us a little bit about this?
Yes, it's football time, Phil, and the year 1908 is a significant one for football in Mount Carmel. There were football teams before 1908, but they were teams that were composed of boys who had quit school and were already working, as well as boys who were students in the high school. But 1908 is significant because it was the first team that was composed solely of high school boys who were actually enrolled in the high school at that time. This appears to be a football parade, kind of like the old Thursday night pep rallies that we used to have. Appears that that's what it is. In the background, there are boys dressed up like Indians. I'm not sure what team it would have been at that time that were the Indians, but in any case, it looks like they got a lot of people out for that parade. This picture, by the way, was taken at the corner of 4th and Hickory Streets. And in the background are the houses where at least the Schaffners used to live on the corner there, and the Wetzels. That's kind of in the background. At least one person I know who was on this football team was the late H. Marshall Stecker, who many of us remember was on this first football team.
Now, if I recall correctly, if this happens to be the opening game, we played Milton in the very first game in 1908 and won that particular ball game. And of course, we won many since then.
Well, I'm not as familiar as you are, Phil, with the actual schedule itself, but again, it must have been, you can see that people in Mount Carmel were just as enthusiastic about football then as they are now.
Oh, this appears to be Mummers there, but it certainly isn't Philadelphia. What about this one?
Mount Carmel was a town with mummers too, Phil, so Philadelphia didn't have a monopoly on mummers. The Mummers Parade was a very exciting time in Mount Carmel. They were always held on New Year's Day in Mount Carmel around the turn of the century until they were held, I think, until basically into the 20s, and then for some reason they were discontinued. This photograph is of the captain's gown. The captain of the mummers is located in the center of the picture, and the people the marchers are standing around, and his head is just barely visible in the center of the picture. This photograph was taken, by the way, in about 1908, 1909. The building in the background is the Park Street School building, which was constructed on the northern end of the town park. There was a public outcry in around the turn of the century about the town park, in that there were not supposed to be any buildings erected on it, and at that time the Anthracite Fire Company was erected on the park also, but it was not at the part of the park where it is now. It was more almost in the middle of the park. Then of course we had the school building, and the park really got kind of worn out at that time. So in around 1910, when they finally tore the Park Street school building down, they decided that nothing else would be erected on it except, of course, the Anthracite Fire Company. The row of houses on North Park Street in the background looks very much like it is today. It's very easy to identify those houses. Faintly visible in the background is the smokestacks of the G.A.R. colliery, which was a very important facility in the industrial facility in the Mount Carmel area. It employed many men from town, and it was one of the larger operations by the Lehigh Valley Coal Company.
Go, Phil.
This picture, I guess, was taken on North Oak Street. Can you tell us something about this one?
This also is a parade, Phil. Since we have some of the people on this float dressed up like patriots, and by the dress of some of the bystanders, it appears that it could be the Mummers Parade too, or it also could be maybe something for Washington's birthday. At any rate, this float is from the Patriotic Sons of America, which was a fraternal organization in Mount Carmel, of which there were two bodies in town. One of them was located in the KFC building, and the other was located in the Ray and Derrick building. How there got to be two in the town, I don't really know, and the organization went out of existence basically in about the late 30s. At any rate, they were very influential in their time, and you can see a good example of an early parade float at this particular time. Also on the right-hand side of the photo that we see there is one of the earliest stores in Mount Carmel. This was a store that was erected by David Camp, basically in the very early 1850s. Across the street from it was also the Mount Carmel House, which was a hotel that was erected in 1853 and burned down to the ground in 1898 and was never built again. Also on the left-hand side of this photograph that we can just barely make out is the old police station. That was for many years the police station in Mount Carmel, and also then became the first site of the Mount Carmel Public Library.
I understand that before the turn of the century we had quite a few hotels in Mount Carmel, and this appears to be one of them.
Well, in the last photo, Phil, we mentioned the Mount Carmel House, of course, which was really one of the most famous and one of the earliest in Mount Carmel. Also, of course, we also mentioned about the early Mount Carmel House, which was on the site of the Marble Hall, and of course the commercial hotel that was there before the Marble Hall. But this is, of course, a national hotel, and it's familiar to all of us because it basically looks almost the same. It's still there on the corner of 2nd and Oak Street. This hotel was an early one in Mount Carmel. It was erected in the early 1870s. And was a very, very famous hotel in its time. I have many accounts from the early newspapers of Mount Carmel on payday, which was usually a Saturday, when miners really went out and had a rip-snorting time, and literally it was like the Wild West with men flying out of the doors onto the street, and rumbles and rumpuses and all types of things. But that was part of the color, of course, of early Mount Carmel. But I was fortunate to get this picture of the National Hotel because, again, it is one of the oldest standing buildings in Mount Carmel. And I think the oldest building in Mount Carmel is the Donahue Stone House, which is located on South Turnpike Street at the southern end of town on South Turnpike Street. That was the home of Patrick Donahue, who was a very early coal operator, and was erected in 1867. But this building was erected just a few years later. But to my knowledge, other than the Donahue Stone House, the National Hotel is the second oldest standing building in Mount Carmel.
Oh, this is a familiar sight. It's definitely Oak Street, right?
Yeah, as long as we're talking about hotels, Phil, I thought I'd put in this picture of the commercial. As I said, the commercial hotel was built on the site of the Mount Carmel Inn, which was one of the earliest inns in Mount Carmel. A very interesting event happened in 1898 to both the Mount Carmel House and the commercial hotel. In January of that year, the commercial hotel was burned to the ground, and it was according to the newspapers, it was a case of arson. Only 2 months later, the Mount Carmel House burned to the ground, and it was also supposed to be done by the same person who burned down the commercial hotel. To my knowledge, they never captured the parties responsible for either of those fires. But at any rate, the commercial building here, which I said also was burned in January of 1898, the interior of the hotel was basically gutted, but the exterior remained. So when they rebuilt the thing, they put a marble facade onto it, and it became the Marble Hall in about 1912.
Oh, this one has me puzzled. You're going to have to explain this picture to me.
Well, I think I'd be remiss with my own family if I didn't show this picture. This is the first Kessler's jewelry store in Mount Carmel. This picture was taken about 1890, and it's a photograph of my great-grandfather, Benjamin Franklin Kessler, and his wife, my great-grandmother, in front of our store, which at that time was located at 37 South Hickory Street. It stayed on Hickory Street until just around about the turn of the century, and then of course we moved to the present location at 38 South Oak Street.
Oh, this appears to be, are they nurses we're looking at, or volunteers?
Well, Phil, I'd really like to have a little bit of help on this photograph from anyone out there who might be able to help me identify this a little bit more clearly. My good friend John Pavarnik gave me this photograph, and it was actually the property of someone else who had given it to him. The way it was explained to me is that this was a corps of volunteer nurses who helped out during the famous flu epidemic of 1918. This was taken, of course, on Market Street near the old high school building, and we were looking kind of south on Market Street. But I really don't know much more about this photograph, and if there's, again, as I said, if there's anyone out there who perhaps could supply a little bit more information on that, I would very much appreciate it. Of course, we know about the famous flu epidemic of 1918. It had disastrous consequences for the country. There were many, many fatalities. I think, Phil, you told me before we showed this picture that there were roughly 8,000 people who came down with the disease in Mount Carmel at that time, and you also mentioned there were about 150 fatalities at that time. Is that true?
Well, we were just talking about this in class because it's apropos. A lot of people have had the flu recently. And according to the newspaper reports of 1918, this was right before the armistice, there were over 8,000 people in the borough of Mount Carmel alone who were hospitalized because of the flu. They turned the new high school at 3rd and Market Street into a hospital, and they put huge tents up in the town park to try to take care of all the victims of the flu. In Minersville, they were really hard hit, where they were printing the names of the people who died overnight every day in the paper, and they finally had to discontinue because people started to panic. There were so many names printed. They also diverted Army doctors who were in New York ready to board ships to go over to the front in France and Germany, and they diverted them to the coal regions. 27 of these doctors came to Mount Carmel, and under Colonel Montelius, who was from Mount Carmel, also a doctor, they performed at Mount Carmel. So these are evidently volunteer nurses that were assisting in this great flu epidemic.
By the way, when we're talking about Colonel Montelius, Colonel Montelius, or Dr. Montelius, was actually, his name was Ralph W. Montelius. He lived in the home on Hickory Street where Glenn Wetzel and his family lives on South Hickory Street. And Dr. Montelius was, incidentally, the son of Alfred Montelius, who was one of the early coal operators in Mount Carmel and became perhaps one of Mount Carmel's first millionaires. Dr. Montelius also served during the Spanish-American War and World War I, and as you mentioned, rose to the rank of colonel.
Well, this picture we did a lot of research on, as I recall, trying to date the photograph exactly by reading the marquee, and caused quite a lot of research to be done.
Well, I think you're a little bit modest on this, Phil, because the research on this one was basically done by you. We had some fun with this photograph. As you can see, the film playing at this time is George Arliss starring in the green goddess. And this picture was shown at the Victoria Theater on October 8th, 9th, and 10th, 1923. The theater opened that year earlier, around the June or July of that year. And this next sequence of photographs was taken by the Chamberlain Company as in kind of an album that they featured their new theaters. I think it's appropriate, really, that we kind of conclude our program with this sequence of photographs because, in a sense, it is history in Mount Carmel, and it's something that most of us today were around to watch this building being torn down just a few years ago. And again, it's already another building that's kind of gone into the past. But many of us have fond memories of going to the movies in the Victoria Theater. And for most of us, it represents kind of the whole childhood experience in theater going when we think of going to the movies in Mount Carmel. At this time, I'd like to thank Mr. George McPhee and the staff here at WKMC Television for making this broadcast possible. At this time, I'd like to take the center of the stage, though, and make a plea to anyone out there who might have old photographs or information or anything available on Old Mount Carmel. Phil and I have been involved in this project for a couple of years, and we are eventually hoping, of course, to put out more programs such as this one, and also perhaps in the near future put out a book. But any property, of course, that would be loaned to us, we would make sure that it was returned in the same condition that it came to us. And my telephone number is in the phone book, and my address, and so is Phil. So that's Hugh Jones and Phil Gergen. We would really appreciate any cooperation from anyone out there who would be willing to help us in this project. Thank you very much again.